is the second in a series of monthly media briefings hosted by the Act Against Hate Alliance with grant funding from the California State Library's Stop the Hate program. I'd like to turn the microphone over to my wife, May for her opening comments. May?
Thank you, Bob. Good morning. I'm Amy Huff, and together with my husband, Senator Bob Huff, we are honored to host this series and extend our deepest gratitude to all of you for your attendance and support. Senator Huff and I have both been very committed to public service throughout our careers. Hate crimes touch us all. We established the Act Against Hate Alliance to better focus on the deplorable rise in hate crimes. The principal mandate of the Act Against Hate Alliance is to identify effective solutions to stopping hate crimes. Each segment of this series will bring together stakeholders and thought leaders with a cross-disciplinary focus, along with members of the media, to look at what is happening, to analyze causes, and then with each segment to begin our focus on solutions. Back to you, Bob.
Thank you, May. Our speakers in today's segment each bring enormous experience to this program, and it's a great honor.
Recording in progress.
It's a great honor to have them with us today. While one of our scheduled speakers had a family emergency and could not join us, we will be hearing presentations from Senator Gloria Romero, former Senate Majority Leader and Chair of the Senate Education Committee, and Natalie Salazar, who is the Executive Director of the Los Angeles chapter of Crime Stoppers. We will have some time for questions before we conclude, so please type any questions in the chat thread throughout the program. Also, Amy wanted me to mention that those of you from the media, if you would just log your name, contact information in the chat so that we know you're here, that would be appreciated as well. We can get in contact with you later. Our first presenter is Senator Gloria Romero. A forceful advocate for education reform and civil rights, Gloria Romero is the former Majority Leader of the California State Senate and author of Just Not That Likeable: The Price All Women Pay for Gender Bias. Romero possesses a keen knowledge of the legislative and political process. She was elected to the 24th Senate District in 2001, representing East Los Angeles and the Greater San Gabriel Valley. She served as Senate Democratic Caucus Chair and as Senate Majority Leader, the first woman to ever hold that leadership position in the history of the California State Senate. During her public service, Romero succeeded in writing groundbreaking laws in education and criminal justice reforms. Prior to serving in the Senate, she held the post of Majority Whip in the California State Assembly from 1998 to 2000, and served on the LA Community College Board of Trustees from 1995 to 1998, and the Los Angeles Elected Charter Reform Commission in 1998. Additionally, she held the post of California Director of Democrats for Education Reform, a political action committee dedicated to making education reforms in the Democratic Party. Romero holds a PhD in social personality psychology and is Professor Emeritus at California State University, Los Angeles. A passionate champion for education reform, Romero emphasizes that California cannot fully compete in the 21st century economy if we fail to close the achievement gap and create an educational system that puts first students and fosters success for all students. If our children are to succeed, we must confront and dismantle the stagnant status quo, which has, for far too long, dominated education politics and policy in California, asserts Romero. In order to transform the lives of our children, we must transform the schools to which we send them and support parental school choice. Parents must be the educational architects of their children's futures, she adds. She is the author of California's groundbreaking Open Enrollment Act, also known as the Parent Trigger Law, which provides opportunities for school choice for parents of children trapped in chronically academic, underperforming, failing schools. She has successfully started independent public charter schools and is the co-founder of Explore Academy Charter School in Orange County, California. Welcome, Senator Romero. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. And let me just say that I actually lost service temporarily. So I'm back. Good to be back.
We're glad you were able to get back on, and hopefully that won't happen to your presentation.
All right. So I actually missed the introduction. So let me go ahead and start with an overview. Basically, I want to congratulate the Alliance. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for the invitation to be with you, and for all of those who have joined in to participate in today's discussion. This is a very timely issue. It's one that hasn't gone away. And I think I just want to pause for a moment and think that it's been 4 decades, 40 years, when I know an issue that impacted me very strongly. When we heard, we learned about the beating to death of Vincent Chen, a young Asian American of Chinese descent. He was beaten to death in Michigan. And you might recall the year in which he was beaten to death. It was in the early 1980s. There was a severe recession going on in this country. And there was a great deal of, at that time, anti-Japanese sentiment, especially in a declining auto industry. And Michigan, of course, is ground zero for the car industry, car production. So here was a young man. He was actually celebrating the next phase in his life when he was seen. He was called, again, to that notion that all Asians are the same. There was the assumption that he was Japanese American, as if that would matter. But the blame was attributed to him, and he was beaten to death. I think it's one that we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge 4 decades ago. So fast forward to the present time. We are, as we speak, here in the city of Los Angeles, in the area of LA, witnessing the calls for
Gloria, if you can hear us, you just went mute again. If you could log in and just do it on audio, that will help the bandwidth some. And in the meantime, while she's getting back on, let me just say that, it was similar to what Gloria was talking about happening in the auto industry that created the whole Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. It was a political party that formed, the Working Men's Party, that was alarmed that the Chinese were coming in at such huge numbers. They were worried they were going to replace them. And so they started this whole movement that ended up in the nationally passed Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which kept Chinese from only men could come over, women couldn't come over, they couldn't marry, they couldn't own land. They had a lot of onerous things that happened, and it took until 1943 when the US was working with China to defeat Japan that they started to unravel those laws that were put in place. And it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 64 that the numbers started increasing, coming back. So, hate and hate incidents are systemic. They're often related to how we perceive other people to impact us. And that is, certainly something we have to overcome. I don't see that we have Gloria back yet.
I'm back.
Oh, there we go. Good.
Just got back. I got kicked out.
Yeah, maybe if you take your video off and just do audio, that will help because it's taking some of the bandwidth. And I don't know if it's on your end or our end. But yeah, just go ahead and proceed. I was just talking to fill space till you got back on. Thanks, Gloria. Take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. So I was just commenting that this is such a timely time. And, here we are 40 years after the beating death of Vincent Chen. We're facing in the city of Los Angeles the upending of politics, where we have the nation, this has gone international, where 3 city council members, all Latino, all Democrats, both Senator Huff and I served alongside these individuals, or 2 of them at least, in the California state legislature, and listening to some very vile racist comments that were issued against a number of individuals based on their skin color, African American, Armenian American, fellow Latinos, poor people, etc. It's one in which I think we take a look at how power, sadly, has become too associated with skin color, and basically looking to posture how you gain political strength, but on the backs of somebody else. So we'll see what happens here in the city of Los Angeles. Those two issues are very real. For me, hate crimes are personal. I was the victim of a hate crime in the early 1990s when I was a professor at California State University, Los Angeles. And at that time, there was a great deal of at that time, I think even continuing, there was a great deal of outcry over immigration, over undocumented, illegal immigrants. And basically, I began to receive a number of online threats against me as a woman, a Latina, Mexican American. It was quite frightening. And I reported this to the university police because I didn't know who was watching me. What was next? The comments were vile. The police at Cal State LA sadly told me that there was nothing they could do. I basically had to wait until I was assaulted for them to do anything. And I thought it can't be. But ultimately, I was able, I pursued it. I kept pushing it, thinking this is wrong. And ultimately, this was launched as a federal crime. And we did go to court. I went to court in Los Angeles in federal court. Sadly, he was a young Asian American, a male who did talk about the concern that he had over what he talked about, the quote unquote, the encroachment of Latinos in California, in Los Angeles. And he was prosecuted. It broke my heart as a university professor to testify against a young Asian American male, but it was the right thing for me to do. The young man was, of course, very apologetic. He was sentenced. He did serve time. There was a probation court, et cetera. He was in one of the federal camps. So all of this occurred in the Southland. So for me, in looking at this, across decades and at a personal level, the issue is quite real. So where are we today? I think that it's very important to look at even just last year when the California Department of Justice, under the leadership of the appointed Attorney General, the new appointed Attorney General, he released a report in which he identified that hate crimes in California have actually surged since 9/11, that these are at the highest rates in California. And we oftentimes think about California as being, the West Coast, the left coast, so progressive, so understanding, tolerant, et cetera. And yet we see that nothing can be further from the truth. California is no different than what we are seeing across the country. And I think all of us have been horrified when we've seen images from New York to San Francisco and in California, seeing especially women and especially Asian American women who have been beaten on the streets, beaten in the subways, being shoved to intended deaths. These are just outrageous. It's unbelievable. And it's no wonder that crime has become the top issue, and deservedly so, as this nation now prepares to go out and vote in the midterm elections once again. According to recent reports as well, the anti-Asian American Pacific Islander hate report, which was issued just this year, it has found that only half of Asian Pacific Islanders even feel safe going out of their homes. So imagine that we come out of a pandemic in which we were told to basically to hunker down. And yet when we come out, if you're Asian, if you're female, oftentimes elderly, sometimes in a wheelchair, you become the prime suspect for being beaten. I mean, that is the ultimate of control. when we think about that. So almost half of Asian American Pacific Islanders feel like I'm not even going to go out of my home. 65% worry about the safety of their family members and particularly their elders in going out of their homes. 32% reported that they worry about their kids' safety at school or on the way to school. And Senator Huff and I were both the chair and the vice chair of the Education Committee. So we know that it becomes very difficult to learn when you're in school if you are worried about your physical security, your absolute physical security. So there's so many issues that we can discuss. I think certain solutions we talked about, certainly education is very important, our schools, our society, et cetera. Enforcement, we always talk about new legislation. I would be one to say that I think we've got plenty of laws on the books, including hate crime, anti-hate crime legislation. We have to look at enforcement, but that also raises the concern about this is not a time, it really has never been a time to defund the police. Certainly we want accountability, police reforms, responsibility under color of authority so that no community is disenfranchised. But clearly it was complete wacko to have the defund the policing movement take place here in California, in Los Angeles, and across the country. So there's a number of issues. So before I stop, let me just say as well, when we talk about anti-hate legislation, you have to be able to see people as human beings. You cannot just desensitize. And when we don't see people as individuals, as humans, it becomes easy to target them and to have them become victims of a crime because we're desensitized to that. Whether we refer to a child as a monkey, or whether we cannot even identify somebody and who they are. What I found very disturbing is that even in our educational sector, according to the report that was released this year, 42% of the people surveyed, these are American adults surveyed, could not name a single historical event involving Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. I mean, that's almost half the country, as though the internment of Asian Americans during World War II never occurred. 58% couldn't name a single prominent Asian American in American life. So if you can't visualize it, you have no idea. And we oftentimes go to, entertainment, Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Ang Lee, Academy Award winning individuals, George Takei, Senator Tammy Duckworth, a United States Senator. But if you can't see it, we can't name it, and it becomes easier to be violent against. So we have our work cut out for us. And let me thank Senator Huff and May Huff and the Alliance for the work you're doing. And thank you for letting me participate with you. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Senator. You made a lot of comments. We will, that's fodder for some questions later on I'd like to follow up on. But in the meantime, thank you again. So our next speaker is, let me cue this up correctly. Our next speaker is Natalie Salazar. Natalie is the Executive Director for the Los Angeles Regional Crime Stoppers Program, a nonprofit organization that provides the community the ability to report crime tips via text, web, and a toll-free number, confidentially, anonymously, without fear of retaliation or retribution. She is a nationally recognized expert in community organizing and mobilization, whose 40+ years of experience include directing a federal pilot program and co-authoring Rising Above Gangs and Drugs, How to Start a Community Reclamation Project. In addition, she's developed California statewide reports on gangs and drugs, victims' rights, community-oriented policing and problem solving, as well as violence prevention. Natalie recently retired after 21 years as the Director of Bureau Operations for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. During her tenure, she served as commanding officer for the Community Law Enforcement Partnership Programs, overseeing all crime prevention, community relations, the volunteer program, and community emergency response teams, which we called CERT. The Community Affairs Bureau, handling the department's 24-hour media and community-oriented policing bureau, and chair of the board, lead instructor for the California Regional Community Policing Institute. While Natalie's teaching experience is not in the traditional public school setting, her hands-on teaching experience and training have brought law enforcement and the community together in innovative, proactive responses to gangs, drugs, and violence. Natalie is currently president of the board of directors for Day One Pasadena, a community-based nonprofit that convenes and coordinates youth and community leadership while providing drug, alcohol, tobacco, and violence prevention services for Altadena, Pasadena, Sierra Madre, as well as the greater San Gabriel Valley. Natalie, welcome. We'll now turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Mei, for the opportunity to address the group today. And also, as I mentioned to Gloria before we started, it's good to see her again. Our paths have crossed several times in our careers. I thought it was interesting when she talked about 4 decades ago. In 2025, I will be having my 50-year high school reunion. I'm a native Pasadena and very proud of that, and so are my parents. But the reason I mention that to you is growing up here, we were one of the first Mexican-American families to be in Pasadena. My grandfather's home was taken as part of eminent domain for the 710 freeway, which obviously will never be going through Pasadena or South Pass or Alhambra in our lifetimes. But I went to school with a number of Japanese Americans. And I remember one of my best friends in high school telling me I couldn't come over to her home because her father, who was the victim of an internment camp, relocated, lost his neighborhood store, again, felt that the Mexicans in the community were part of the cause after they had taken over the store. And one of the things that Gloria mentioned, that we all need to mention this, is that we have to get to know people on a personal basis. And once I kept bugging her dad over and over to talk to me and meet me, we all became great friends, and he got to meet my parents. So growing up in a melting pot in the city of Pasadena that went through quite a bit with busing, I feel lucky to have been exposed to a variety of different cultures and still am with my friendships. I also mention this because 2 days ago, a good elementary school friend of mine had posted on his Facebook page that he felt he was now the latest to be a victim of hate crimes against Asians. And he had just been robbed. He'd been targeted and followed home or on his way home, and was bumped by a car, got out to check the damage. He realizes as he's telling the story a number of things that he probably should have done differently in Monday morning quarterbacking or in hindsight, but ended up being the victim of a robbery. And so again, these things will touch and continue to touch all of us. I want to talk to you about Crime Stoppers, what Crime Stoppers is. As Bob mentioned, I'm the executive director for Los Angeles Regional Crime Stoppers, which covers the entire county of Los Angeles. We have some 350 Crime Stopper programs throughout the country. The whole purpose of Crime Stoppers, it's a nonprofit organization that provides a safe and anonymous way for anyone to report crime. So if there's a crime that was witnessed anywhere in the country, you could always call our 800 number. You could go on our website. You could submit that tip and do the right thing without fear of retaliation. This is something that's critical in dealing with a number of our communities because people are afraid. And they're afraid of what can happen in their own neighborhoods if they're targeted. They're afraid what could happen in their workplace. But we still have to be able to have a vehicle to report crime for those that don't feel comfortable in reporting directly to law enforcement. When I was asked to take over Crime Stoppers, it was back when I was working with the Sheriff's Department. And I remember at that time, Sheriff Lee Baca saying, hey, we've got to be a part of this program. He had been contacted by 2 mothers of murdered children who were finding that no one would come forward to give any information on how their children were killed. They knew that there were Crime Stopper programs throughout the country and wondered, why don't we have one here in Los Angeles? This was back in 2007, 2008. In 2009, former LAPD Chief Bill Bratton and Sheriff Lee Baca then decided we've got to look at another way. When I first heard about Crime Stoppers, I thought, I just spent my entire career trying to get people to talk to law enforcement, to see that as a viable partnership in the neighborhood, which we know faces ups and downs. Leading our community policing efforts, we could see what communities were willing to report crimes and which ones weren't and why. And so this was important to look at another type of alternative. Crime Stoppers, as I mentioned, the 350 agencies across the country, it first started in 1976. Now, I already told you how old I am. A number of you on here were probably not even born then. And so you don't relate to not having cell phones, not having video footage, relying on getting up to change the channel manually, and being forced. I can see Sunita laughing in the background. So it was a very, very different time then. And the reason that Crime Stoppers started, it was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was a young gas station attendant who was murdered brutally in front of a number of witnesses, and no one would come forward. There were no leads. The detective was so frustrated that he finally went to the local service organizations, which we would look at, like Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, Business and Professional Women's Associations. They went to those groups, and he also went to his local television station. And in those times, it was a local station. We didn't have all of the things that we have today. But he got a reenactment made, and he got the service organizations to put up some money. Now, this is a controversial point here, because a lot of us feel, why should we pay people for doing the right thing? Sometimes we have to have a hook to get people involved. Sometimes that may be the push that encourages somebody to come forward because they may need that type of money. But the crime was finally solved after several weeks, and the push in the media of getting the word out there. If you know a crime has been committed, you can do any of the following things. We have a hotline number. It's an 800 number, 1-800-222-TIPS. This is staffed 24/7 by a third-party call center. When you call that 800 number, your phone number does not show up like it would with a 911 call. It is encrypted. You do not give your name. You do not give any identifying information. You submit your tip. You're given a tip ID number and a passcode. You hang on to that so you can follow up to see, if you choose, what's happened with your tip. Another way of submitting a tip is to do it on our website. And I put the website address in the chat room, the www.lacrimestoppers.org. You will tap on a submit a tip button. Currently, we have it so that you can do the tip in Spanish. We do have Crime Stopper information in a number of the election languages. And those are all things when we started looking at the LA County Commission on Hate Crimes, we made sure that they had copies of our Crime Stopper information in different languages. And that was sent to public safety directors, to chiefs of police, to community-based organizations, again, as a way of being able to to partner, not profit, partner with a nonprofit organization that could help people. The third way is we do have a mobile app. It is P3 Tips. When you look at someone's phone, it's just a blue square with the P3 in the middle of it. And you can submit a tip online. Again, your phone number, your email address, everything is encrypted so that it cannot be traced back to the person that has submitted the tip. If your tip results in an arrest, and let me back up for a second. When we get the tips, they are processed through the LAPD's Department Operations Center, which is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As the tips come in, they go out to the jurisdiction, again, where that crime has occurred. And detectives are identified at every law enforcement agency in Los Angeles County because we partner with all of them. They get that tip in real time and start investigating it. We are not a 911 service. Again, this is if you've seen something, maybe you've seen something on the news, it's been bothering you, you recognize the car or the person, and you want to get that tip in as soon as possible. You can always follow up on your tip, and that again is with the tip ID number you're given and the passcode. And if your tip leads to an arrest, you put that in our system. And when it goes in the system, then again, the tipster checking back in could be eligible for up to $1,000 reward. We pay this on arrest only. And because we don't know who you are, you have to take your 2 tip ID numbers in to any Connecta Federal Credit Union, or if you're up in the Antelope Valley, you can take it in to Cash It Quick. You don't bring ID, you don't bring a passport, you show the 2 tip ID numbers, you're paid, and you're done. You do not go to court. On some of these tip rewards that you see where they're offering upwards of $50,000, the Board of Supervisors gets involved, city councils get involved. These are usually based on arrest and conviction. So the person decides that they are willing to give up their anonymity in going forward for that greater reward amount. I do want to let you know that since we've launched in 2009, we've gotten well over 135,000 tips. They've led to over 4,000 arrests across LA County. Over $51 million in narcotics has been confiscated, 2.6 million in property recovered. They've led to the arrest of 4,000 homicide suspects. And also we're looking at another campaign now to help get guns off the street, especially ghost guns. In terms of hate crimes, and I think there was a question asked in the chat also about how do we get the DA, how do we get law enforcement to take hate crimes seriously? I know the Sheriff's Department are part of the countywide hate crimes task force, and also focusing on Asian hate crimes. And as Gloria mentioned, back in 2020, we were looking at LA County reporting a 76% increase. Scary to see something like that. Some of our more pertinent tips that we've gotten in, and again, when we talk about our tips to groups, we have to be very, very careful that we don't reveal something that could help identify who the tipster is. So when we get questions like, tell me the ethnicity of the majority of your tipsters, we don't know that because we don't ask it. Tell me where you get, or what was the geographic location. We can't reveal that. Again, we are trying to keep everything as anonymous as possible. Back in, excuse me, back in 2021, a number of you may remember, you saw it on ABC or NBC News, the terrifying video of an elderly Asian Lyft driver being beaten by a man he had picked up at an ARCO station. We had a tipster notify us, and again, we got 3 different tips about this regarding who the suspect was, and these tips led to the arrest of the person that was responsible for that horrific beating. Recently in the news, again, we've seen Stephen Reyes, Filipino, 29-year-old, teenagers, again, were trying to steal beer and hit him with an electric scooter. That was recent. We just had a vigil with this, and also 56-year-old Tommy Lee was stabbed by teenagers who were trying to take a wig from his shop. Again, hard workers, people that believe in the American dream and continue to, but don't want to take what's going on in our community. We can't have public safety without public participation. So something like Crime Stoppers gives people an alternative, a way to do the right thing and report crime. So we encourage our media people that are here and listening today. We know you get a very short amount of time to tell a story and get that information out. We know that if you're writing for the paper, and yes, I still do read newspapers, paper ones, in addition to online, but we know you only have so much space. But adding one piece in there that to remain anonymous, contact Crime Stoppers with either the website or the phone number, that can be something that can be a tipping point, that can put in people's heads that we can remain anonymous. Let me look into this. Let me report it. And it can open the door in an investigation. It may not be the tip that leads to the arrest, but it could also be a tip that opens the door to a number of other problems in an area. So I know that we've got some questions in the chat, and Bob and Mamie, I wanted to leave enough time that we could talk about some other things that are brought up. So thank you so much again for having me. I put my contact information in the chat, and I hope that you'll all feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions, and please help let the communities that we serve know that they can submit a tip anonymously to help keep our neighborhoods safer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie, for that presentation. You certainly have a lot of experience in the area of interacting with the community, of making them or attempting to educate them to feel more comfortable with the policing department. It's kind of a catch-22. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later in a question to you. But Sunita Sarabji had a question for Senator Romero. Sunita, would you like to articulate that verbally? If I could have Ronnie unmute you, You can pose that question to her, and there, I think you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Bob. So Senator Romero, I had a follow-up question to the question that you responded to. Hate crime laws currently mandate that the incident must begin with the intention of hate or bias. For example, simply using racist language in the course of a robbery would not constitute a hate crime. Do current hate crime laws need to be broadened to include such incidents? And do we also need hate crime laws to address hate speech, which is currently protected by the First Amendment?
Thank you so much for your question. And this is certainly one that many are grappling with. At this point, though, I am going to say that free speech to me it's one of the hallmarks of a democratic society, and I believe that that criminalizing views that are objectionable and offensive really could be viewed as a slippery slope to censorship and to the closing down of conversation. So I think, to me, I would still stay on the side of looking at making it, having this. If it's only the speech, then we start getting into, well, what might be said? What if somebody's singing a rap song when they go in and they assault somebody? Do we go after them for that language? So I might disagree with the language itself and the speech, but I still would err on the side of looking at the act, the intent, the bias, the action at this point. But it is something that certainly people are talking about. I think ultimately, though, I would still say, though, that we are not going to criminalize and prosecute our way out of this. It still goes back to the beginning of education, of breaking down, as Natalie, when you talked about as well too, just again to the knowledge, the coming together, the learning about our shared communities and histories. So I think that I would still err on that, but it is one that is very, very problematic. I've been called a number of very ugly terms, but I would still err on looking at that person's ignorance, that person's bigotry. But bigotry, to me at least, doesn't necessarily become criminal unless there is the intent or the action to hurt, to violate, to damage me on the basis of that. So that's at least what I would think. Natalie, I'd be curious about your views, and Senator as well.
Yeah, let me just say something before you jump in, Natalie, if you want to add something to that. But Senator Romero was also chair of public safety, as I recall. So these are the very types of issues that she would deal with as chair of that committee. Is something worth regulating more of writing laws, or do we just, work with what we have and respect the rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution? Natalie, do you have some comments on that question as well?
I think it's very disturbing to all of us when we hear things that we consider derogatory, statements that are made, whether they're made in jest, whether someone thinks they're in private, whether it's acceptable culturally within our own cultures to make certain comments. It's disheartening. And one of the things that I will say that Gloria, that Senator Romero had mentioned is we do have so many laws on the books. And I know that there's a challenge on how do you broaden that? How do you add into those laws, or do we create new ones? I think something that Los Angeles County has done with the Hate Crimes Commission is again trying to bring attention to what some of the problems and the issues are that are out there. I know LA County residents can also dial 211 and be able to receive a number of services and referrals. And sometimes it is up to us as nonprofit programs to work with our targeted audience to update them on what is happening out there and what's going on. I think a struggle that a number of us face, and I heard it on the news story again, I think with Stephen Reyes's family, is a lot of us in our cultures deal with our elders very differently. And as we see a very aging population, I am going to be, or am one of them, yeah, accept it, right? But as we see our populations getting older, how do we deal with elders? The respect level. We also have to know that there was a different type of conversation that was going on when they were younger. And sometimes when those things are repeated, we owe it first to look at the source, to try to correct, maybe not correct, but to try to educate that that's not the way we speak anymore. That's not what we talk. That's not acceptable. And here's why. Maybe we need to look at that a little bit more too before rushing to judgment and condemnation.
Thank you, Natalie. I have a question for you, and then I'm gonna, if we have time, I'd like to lob a question to both of you to wrap this up. But Natalie, for your work often had you acting as a community change agent. What have you found to be the most effective way to educate immigrant or minority communities to first trust their police so that they can safely report crimes, including hate crimes?
Good question. And I think one of the most compelling and basic ways is to break bread. Meeting in small groups with neighborhoods over food. I know that sounds pretty basic, but something like that to help open the door, because we all like to eat. And we can learn things through people in terms of food and what's being offered. And I know when we did community meetings, in addition to walking door to door, which door to door didn't necessarily always work in a number of Asian American communities, there was a fear. There was also a fear that a law enforcement agent, they may relate to how law enforcement was in their country, and may be worried that this is not somebody that's going to help me out. So trying to break down in small groups, don't expect large functions and large turnouts. Food is key, and being able to get in and work with young people so that young people can help in talking with their elders, especially when there's some language issues, and trying to work as partners with other nonprofits that may have more expertise in that particular neighborhood.
Excellent, thank you. Senator Romero, did you have any comments on that question?
I would concur with what was said. I think it is, again, to sort of breaking down the barriers. I think that, you know, I've seen, now that I live on the West Side, kids, their eyes just open so wide when they see cops on horses, for example, or the bicycles. You know, the more that you can kind of bring in the others to show, hey, you know, we can get out of the car, get out of the patrol. Sometimes it's the vehicle that's scary. I can't see what's behind that cage. So I mean, if we could get everybody on horseback, great. But I think it is education. I think it's understanding. I think it's also to mutual conversations about the challenges that are faced and supporting community policing goals, some more supporting professional development of cops, holding officers who do the wrong thing accountable. I mean, I think that's a really big thing as well. And holding our own youth accountable as well, teaching our own youth what to do, because it can be frightening when you are detained by a police officer. How do you respond? You know, how do you behave? Schools, again, to welcoming in the police officer or sheriff's deputy or CHP officer. We have so many into a school to explain what is the job that we do. Ride-alongs were always something that I think should be encouraged. You know, so there's a number of things, but it is really removing those stereotypes, asking for transparency, accountability. And the more we get to know each other, the more likely we are to understand each other and not fear.
Excellent, thank you, Gloria. And then for both of you, and we're running low on time, so just take a minute to respond if you would. But looking back over our country's last couple hundred years, we've certainly made progress in hate and systemic racism. We have a long way to go. And certainly in the last few years, we've kind of put it in reverse and we've been going the opposite direction. But if you could wave a magic wand and implement one change to reduce the number of hate incidents, what would that change be? Natalie, you're up first, and then we'll close with Senator Romero.
That's a tough question. My magic wand would be to get people to open their eyes and their hearts and see people are before reacting.
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's got to be a very powerful magic wand. But I think, if we could erase the word hate from our vocabulary and really highlight love instead, maybe that would help.
Thank you. And I asked that question because part of the whole reason we created this webinar series is we're probing the issue, but we don't want to just probe, but we want to understand it. We want to come up with solutions that can be implemented. And we certainly see getting the community engaged in reporting more frequently is essential. Educating our children is certainly more important. Senator Romero, you talked about in the thing that I read, and you probably didn't hear it, but I'm sure you're aware of it. You talked about how parents need to be the architects of their children's education, and yet many times these prejudices, these stereotypes are fostered within the family. And so there's, we need as a community, we don't just let somebody else with their prejudices stay in that loop. We got to gently help bring them forward. And I think, Natalie, your career certainly has been that in reaching out to the community. Idea of breaking bread, I found in the legislature. I mean, I was a Republican in a Democrat controlled, I traveled because we didn't have to deal with policy issues that forced us into positions. We were learning stuff. These are all educational trips. I traveled with Senator Romero. I traveled with a couple of the council members previously mentioned in LA. But the point is, you find the things that bind you together rather than always stressing on the things that force you apart. If we can continue to learn how to do that as a community, as a state, as a nation, as a world, we will get farther down this path and hopefully be reducing the number of hate incidents. So let me do my wrap up now. For those of you in the media audience, I apologize if you had some questions that weren't asked. I haven't looked at the chat lately. But when we pull all the material together, you'll be getting an email from Maymay that will have the resources from today. You'll have everything you need in kind of a little media kit. I'm not sure that we got everything recorded. I understand from our tech guy that we lost it a little bit in the beginning. And if somebody has a complete recording, if you could forward it to Maymay or me, that would be helpful. But we'll give you a link of what we have on the video. We will have the headshots and biographies of our speakers. We'll have the list of participants. We'll send that out to you to help you as you report on this. And, expect that. You can also get information on our website, actagainsthate.org. And again, our most profuse thanks to Senator Romero and Natalie Salazar for taking your time to share your insights, your wisdom, your experience with us today. Act Against Hate Alliance seeks to bring out the best of who we are as a state and as a nation: respectful, diverse, compassionate, nonpartisan, and inclusive. Those words don't describe us necessarily as we've been the last few years, but we aspire to that. We all know too well the devastation that hate crimes unleash upon our communities, our state, and our world. Working together, we will rise to celebrate the values that unite us and to find answers to what divides us. We will act against hate. Be sure to mark your calendar for next month's briefing, which will also be held the second Wednesday, which is November 9th at 11 a.m. Thanks everybody for attending. That concludes today's program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Maymay and Bob. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Let's stay in touch
Okay, good.
over some food.
Yeah, over some food.
Yes.
There you go. With Maymay, it's
All
always
right. All righty. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.